I am so excited to have with us today Lisa Piercey, MD, MBA, and what is FACHE? Maybe I should know that.
Sure, it stands for Fellow of the American College of Healthcare Executives.
I got it. Got it. Thank you, Lisa. And I am Teresa Spangler, CEO of Plaza Bridge Group. And as everyone knows that follows me, this is Future Forward. And we're going to be talking to Lisa today, which I'm thrilled that you could make time to do this, Lisa. It's wonderful. Your background is one, amazing. And I want to recognize your work because it was tremendous in a very, very difficult time. So you're nationally recognized physician executive, which is an unusual combination, and having the MBA, in having a lot of public and private sector experience. You're also the founder and CEO currently of Tristela Strategies, which is an advisory firm also helping healthcare investors and operators. I think you served, which was a tremendous, support. I'm sure, to Governor Bill Lee's cabinet on the 14th commissioner of the health for the state of Tennessee, managing $700 million and over 4,300 employees. And if I'm not mistaken, during COVID.
That's right. I had about a year before the pandemic, but pretty much all the rest of my tenure was pandemic related. So I joke with the governor. I said, "You tricked me," and he said, "I didn't know."
I can't even imagine. And you have so much in your history, and I want to make sure we get to that. But I think the very first thing that would be wonderful to talk about is this was a really challenging time, and you had a really tough job and 4,300 employees to manage. Can you maybe walk through some of those challenges and what strategies can leaders take away today? Because we're moving from one potential challenge to economic challenges. Let's talk about how you dealt with a lot of the challenges that you were faced, especially coming right into the role.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Teresa. I'm glad to be here today, and I could literally talk about this for hours, so I'll do my best to keep it succinct. But you ask a good question about the challenges of the role, and being a state health official during a pandemic, an unexpected pandemic, obviously, was not something that A, I had trained for, or B, had expected.
Mm.
And then the jury's still out of whether or not I would have signed up for it had I known that was going to happen. I mean, my college student asked me that not long ago. She said, "Mom, if you had known that this was going to happen, would you have still taken the job?" Of course, the knee-jerk response is absolutely not.
Yeah.
But then, you think about it, you're like, well, I did really learn a lot. And I got a lot of exposure and experience that literally no leadership program, no training could ever give you.
Yeah.
So for that, I'm grateful. But I mean, I make no bones about how difficult it was. In fact, it was so difficult across the nation that the last number I heard, about 38 out of the 50 state health officials turned over during the first year of the pandemic. So there were only about a dozen of us that stuck it through, but we all came out with battle scars.
Yeah.
But when I think back on that time, one of the things that, I mean, we all know, whether you were in the role of managing the response or not, is how difficult and distracting the politicization of healthcare was during that time. And that was particularly foreign to me as a physician. And so I guess one of the biggest learnings that I had from the entire experience was that facts don't change people's minds. And that was very, very difficult for me to internalize, particularly early on, because when those first few weeks were happening and we were starting to learn about this is what this is and this is what you should do to protect yourself. Of course, this was well before vaccine, but it even continued through that. I thought, as a lifelong scientist, that changing science and changing, evolving information, that is a good thing. We want to do that. We want to continue learning, particularly in something, and people tend to forget, there was this concept called novel coronavirus. This is a new thing. We didn't know anything about it.
Yeah.
And so we as scientists are used to that. We want that to happen. But it became evident very quickly that the public was not accustomed to that.
Yeah.
And so when you say something that may contradict an earlier something you said, because you now know more than you used to know, oh, well, we can't trust you when you're, pulling the rug out from under us and those kinds of things. And so that was hard for me as a scientist, because that was something that I was used to doing. And so when people weren't internalizing and heeding the advice that we were given, I thought, well, I must not be saying it clearly enough. I must not be saying it figuratively loudly enough.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to be, more straightforward. Maybe I need to get more serious. But that wasn't it. It was the fact that when people hear information that causes them to be at odds with their tribe, and you can use that term in a lot of different ways. That might be their family, their ethnic group, their workplace, their whatever. They oftentimes would rather be wrong or subscribe to a different fact pattern if it still creates harmony within their group or their tribe. And, we saw that everywhere. And I even saw that in members of my own family, this battle between, well, I know her, I trust her, talking about me, and she's never steered me wrong before. And she's saying this one thing, but for example, my coffee group at the diner every morning that I have breakfast with, they're saying something else.
Yeah.
And how do I justify that? So that was one of the biggest learnings that I had.
That lesson is such an important lesson. And I take it, I understand because I have scientific family, and the trust, but the influencing of individuals. Did you learn strategies to help bring that influence about? And I want to kind of mirror, because I think business leaders are often having to think about how they can influence, and especially in times that are not good, when things aren't going the way you want them to go or you thought they were going to go. And so those strategies are incredibly helpful, and sometimes we're just not prepared. So can you talk maybe about a few strategies that you felt did work?
Sure. Two come to mind, I guess. One is pretty evident and everybody kind of understands it, but you really have to be intentional about it. And that is speaking on another person's level, that you're trying to get to. And you think, well, that's not profound. But when you really think about the assumptions that you make in your own head and the things that you've known forever and ever, may be different than the assumptions they have, or the things that the principles that they've always operated under. So finding that common ground to start with, and it's a delicate balance. You don't ever want to be demeaning or insulting to somebody, but you have to have that common understanding, because where it might look perfectly rational on paper, if they're not coming from the same spot, then we're not going to end up together.
Right.
The second thing, and we certainly learned this, particularly in vaccine trust and distribution, was having a trusted voice. So, and sometimes I just kind of lay it out there. Hey, higher socioeconomic status, white, female saying, here, I'm from the government, you should trust me. That's not going to work.
Right.
And as I mentioned a minute ago, saying it louder, saying it more sternly, that makes it worse.
Right.
And so, you have to find those trusted voices within the tribes that I mentioned. And sometimes those are not healthcare people. And I just deal in healthcare, so that's what I'll speak to, but they're oftentimes not healthcare individuals.
Right.
If there is someone in that community, in that workplace, in that faith-based organization that has a healthcare background, that's kind of your golden ticket to bridge that gap. But sometimes it's just a trusted voice that people look to.
Yeah.
And so when you can find that person, have a relationship with that person, and you get on common ground, then they can be the deliverer of that message, and it's going to be received so much more warmly by the group that identifies with that individual versus somebody who is oftentimes perceived as just a talking head on television.
Right, right. It begs to bring up the point of emotional intelligence and having empathy with people and meeting them where they are, which is so important in business, and no matter what the instances are that are happening. Take us back to your decision to become a physician. And if I am remembering correctly, you also are very involved or were involved with pediatric abuse or child abuse. So maybe walk us through, how did you decide to become a physician? Where was your influence in that?
Teresa, that's a great question because I've never known anything different. I just grew up as a kid, loving science and math. I will tell you that I'm the first college graduate in my family. And my parents are both very successful, but they're not college graduates. They don't have a lot of formal education. They're small business owners. And so to their credit, even though it wasn't the path they followed, they were very supportive and encouraging to me in going on not only to college, but specifically to graduate school. They each had some college, but the whole graduate school territory was new to all of us. But from some of my earliest memories, third, fourth, fifth grade, I can't remember the show. I mean, well, when I was a little kid, it was Trapper John MD. I'm really showing my age
I
now.
remember that.
Yeah. But then I guess maybe as I was in middle school or high school, I can't really remember. That's when the show ER came out. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think George Clooney was on that show, which was a good motivation to watch the show anyway. And so I remember, this is embarrassing, but I remember sitting in the living room as a teenager. I had a little stethoscope and would put it around my neck and watch that. It was just, I wanted to do that. I wanted to be that. And spoiler alert, I still want to be that. I love being a physician. It's my favorite thing. And so, it begs the question, why aren't you doing that full time? And it's because I like to do a whole lot of things, but I still love to do that. But so I do still get to do that, and I can take you through that. So I did go to medical school, or I went to undergrad and got a degree in chemistry, which always made sense to me in my head. Math and physics just came easy to me. History, geography, not so much. I'm not your girl when it comes to that, but I just always really enjoyed the sciences and the technical aspect of it. Got a degree in chemistry and then went on to medical school, and initially thought I wanted to be a surgeon, cardiovascular surgeon or some kind of surgeon. Really enjoyed the surgical environment. Frankly, I think I was pretty good at it. And then as a lot of things happen, life happens, and I had a baby. And I thought, I can't figure out a way to, have this infant and then proceed through a surgical residency. And so I also always enjoyed pediatrics and neonatology. And so I went into a general pediatrics residency, did well, enjoyed it, was ultimately the chief resident. That last year of my residency, I got pregnant with triplets. And so had a set of triplets about a month before I finished residency. So here I was, I don't know, in my late 20s, and had 4 kids, ages 3 and under. And so I said, well, I'll go into outpatient practice, and I actually joined the practice that my pediatrician, when I was a kid, and was a very welcoming environment. Moved back home and did that, and very much enjoyed that. But during my residency, I had a mentor who actually, she was just sort of the only other working mom. And she was a pediatrician, and residents, regardless of their specialty, often do something that's called a continuity clinic, which it simulates an ongoing, regular doctor-patient relationship. And as I recall, I had my continuity clinic every Wednesday afternoon, and it was with her. And she was my preceptor. And one day, apparently out of the blue, to me, she said, hey, we're not going to do clinic here today. We're going to go down to the advocacy center and do clinic. And I thought, okay, cool, field trip. I don't know, you know, whatever. I don't know what that is. And so we went down, and the advocacy center is somewhat of a moniker for the child abuse center.
Yeah.
And the child advocacy center model is a national model. It's a very, very well done approach to inclusive care for children in a setting where they feel more comfortable. But I didn't know that at the time. And so I went down there, and I recall us seeing, I don't know, 4 or 5 kids that afternoon, a couple of boys who had been sexually abused by their uncle, a 5-year-old who explained the entire methamphetamine manufacturing process to me. That's when they used to make meth at home. Nobody makes it at home anymore. And then the other one was an infant with a pretty bad burn. And I distinctly recall going home that afternoon, that evening after clinic, and I cooked supper for my husband and me. And I remember sitting at the table just feeling so nauseous, I couldn't eat it.
Yeah.
And I thought, I don't ever want to be exposed to that kind of thing again. Well, sure enough, the next Wednesday came around, and she said, all right, we're going down to the advocacy center. I said, no, ma'am, I'm not. and she promptly told me to get in the car, which I did because she was my preceptor. And so we did that weekly for a very long time. And over time, it became this thing where I never, well, clearly, as you can see, I never woke up one day and said, oh, I want to be a child abuse pediatrician.
Yeah.
But what I saw and what I started to feel was, this is an area that is completely underserved. And I mean, it's not about me, but I had to have some motivation to stay in the game there. This makes me feel good to meet a need that is otherwise being unmet, even if it is an extraordinarily unpalatable subject matter at times. It's important work and it's needed work. So I just sort of became the de facto child abuse resident. And at the time, there wasn't a specialty fellowship program. There subsequently has been, and now there is a board certification, and it's what we call subboarded, just like pediatric cardiology. There is pediatric or child abuse pediatrics, which I'm now board certified in. I was grandfathered into that.
Yeah.
And so it's not something that people just wake up and say, I want to do that, but it's something that is rewarding and fulfilling. And so regardless of the path of my career, and it has taken lots of turns because I like variety and I like to keep things fresh, I have never stopped seeing patients. And that one, including when I was on the governor's cabinet, he allowed me to continue seeing patients one afternoon a week. I just saw patients last week. I've got them scheduled this week. And that's important to me, not only to serve those children, but there's an added benefit that it keeps me credible as a practicing physician, because now what I'm doing, I'm leveraging that experience and my advice to other physicians and operators and investors. And there's a little more credibility that comes with that.
Well, so all of that, and you have 4 children, and I can't even imagine having triplets. But you also get an MBA. How did you find time to even do that, and what motivated that?
Well, I often joke, and I think it's a joke. It's kind of not a joke. I got an MBA instead of having a 5th child. And, you know, I do say that tongue in cheek, because honest to goodness, I really only ever intended to have 2 kids. I only had 2 pregnancies. I guess I'm just super efficient in that. But it actually highlighted a professional lesson for me, which was, the babies were a little bit older. They were 2 or 3 years old, so they weren't infants anymore. And their older sister was in school. And so things were starting to settle down a bit, as much as having 3 2-year-olds in the house can be settled. I still don't know how we did all that. But anyway, I was feeling some kind of void. And it wasn't bad, but I just felt itchy and bored. And what I thought at the time was, oh, I need one more child. I want to have one more child. I enjoyed pregnancy and nursing and in the infant stage, the toddler stage, not so much, but I thought that's what that was. And to his credit, my husband said, you don't need another child. You need a hobby. And I thought, well, that may be true. And so I said, well, I think I'll get an MBA. And I told you, both my parents are small business owners. In fact, I was the only, and until just about 6 months ago, remained the only member of my really extended family who wasn't an entrepreneur and who wasn't a small business owner. And so those kind of things just came natural to me because I've been exposed to so much business as a child and helped manage my mom's accounting books at her store. And so I went back and got the MBA, mostly did the work at night and on weekends, and never intended to do anything with it. But my master's thesis was, I won't bore you with the details, but it was in the hospital setting, in the intersection of business and healthcare as it pertains to case management, utilization, review of hospitalized patients. And so I did a really deep dive during my thesis on that. And I thought, well, this is actually pretty interesting. And I could go back to full-time practice, but I'd like to do this too. And so I started a path where I did half practice, half hospital administration. And then a little over 10 years ago, I said, I want to do administration full-time, hospital administration full-time, with the exception of that half day a week of practice, which I have never stopped. I'm 16 or 17 years in now. And so I went into hospital administration. And the short version is over time, became a really big advocate for rural hospitals and the provision of rural health care, access to care for rural and vulnerable populations, which ultimately is what I believe led the governor to reach out when he was elected, because we had a lot of rural hospital closures in Tennessee at the time, and brought me on to help with that. And we got to work on that a little bit before the pandemic, but that work continues today.
Well, you say, you and maybe until recently, but I believe you always have the entrepreneurial spirit, because these dives are going into different things. We absolutely love taking, the next turn or finding that next big thing. So you do have that. But I did have to ask you, what do you do for fun? And when do you find time to have fun?
Actually, I have a lot of fun. Before the pandemic, I haven't done one since the pandemic, although we're getting ready to get all that started again. Was a big triathlete.
Okay.
And so I played college tennis when I was in undergrad, and then went to medical school and, had a bunch of children, like I mentioned. And I found myself probably 8 or 10 years ago in a physical and frankly mental shape that I wasn't used to. And so started low and slow with a 5K, and then moved up and kind of got bored with just running, and had always been a pretty strong swimmer. And I thought, well, I rode a bike as a kid, surely I can ride a bike. And so started doing triathlons, and I've done Alcatraz twice, the Alcatraz triathlon. And so that one was fun. And I've done 2, maybe 3, I think 2 half Ironmans. Okay. So I won't start back at that level now after a 3-year break, but looking forward to getting back into that as a New Year's resolution.
I have a wonderful friend who came in, I think, like 5th in Conan Ironman woman years ago. Wow. And we would go to lunch, and she was like, "You can do it." And I'm like, "No." I could do pieces, and I could do it in shorter, competitions. But anyway, I admire the strength to be able to do those. That's wonderful. Well, so with the kids and all of these different opportunities that you have taken on, what's next for you, and what advice would you give? I talk to so many young people. Let's go there first. And the way that the world looks today is scary. And so they're like asking, what do I even do? I mean, if robots and bots and AI are going to take my jobs, and the world is at odds, and the economy is not doing well, why even bother? And that breaks my heart, because we've always had challenges as a world. It's never ending. So what advice could you give young people to say, if there's still lots of opportunity, and you have the opportunity to change things?
Yeah, it's a great question. And as the mother of now 4 teenagers, well, one is 20, and then the triplets are 17 now. we're having these discussions fairly frequently in our own house, because the triplets they're seniors, so they're about to choose a college, and my oldest is about to choose grad school. So this is a personal thing for me.
Sure.
And what we talk about a lot is find your niche. And this is somewhat misleading, but I'll say it anyway. I've always had a lot of success being a big fish in a small pond. And the reason it's a little misleading is about scale, but what I'm really talking about is scope. So I'm not talking about go work in a tiny company or go work in a rural remote area where you can be the big dog in town. I'm not talking about that. Be specialized in something that you can get passionate about. And this devolves into cliche so quickly. And the one that's coming to mind is, if you do what you love for work, you never have to work a day in your life. Okay. Yeah. My kids don't want to hear that.
I know, mine either.
but it's the truth. And I also know I have friends and family members who don't love what they do. And it's a slog every day to get up. And motivate oneself to do that. And so, when you have the opportunity to not do that, don't do it. Go find something. And it is harder because it's a smaller denominator. There's smaller opportunities when it's a specialty or a niche area. But when I look back on whether it was rural health or child abuse pediatrics, or now what I'm doing, which I'll give you an overview in just a second. It's like, oh, that's different. And tell me more about that. And you bring that unique perspective. And so find that niche and find the thing where you can more easily be an expert in that field. And I actually make a triathlon analogy sometimes, because people tend to get irritated, like, well, of course I got second because there were only 2 of us in the age category. Well, you're beating everybody else that's on the couch and everybody who's not doing it. So just because there aren't a whole lot of people doing it, if it's, as my kids say, if it's your jam, then go ahead and do it. But what I'm into now is, particularly through the pandemic, I really saw this flourishing of the private sector in innovation because we had to. And so I think that's one of the reasons that Tennessee had some of the really bright spots during the pandemic. We had some not so bright spots, but there were some things that we did really, really well. And it was because of the ingenuity and the innovation of our private sector partners here in Tennessee. And so as the pandemic started to wane and I started thinking about next steps, I want to support that and I want to grow and facilitate that. And so I launched an advisory firm just shy of 6 months ago to support both operators and investors. So on the operator side, that's essentially startups, and they fall in a couple of different categories. Healthcare startups that are looking to take it to the next level and scale. Many of them have regulatory and reimbursement concerns, somewhat my background, so help them through that. The other one is actually really interesting. I didn't think I would enjoy it, but I have. There are some non-healthcare startups that are trying to get in the healthcare space. So for example, a transportation company who is wanting to do more non-emergency medical transport, or a cell phone company who's wanting to try to leverage technology to actually improve health outcomes and then monetize that with payers. So having this vantage point of how do you bridge your non-healthcare technology, let me help you integrate it into healthcare. That's been really fun and fascinating and rewarding. So that's on the operator side. On the investor side, it's not quite as novel or innovative, but it's still fun nonetheless, which is a lot of due diligence, some deal flow, like, hey, what are you seeing out there that looks good? And taking that to investors and saying, here's why I think this is an important company for you to look at. And here's where I think the healthcare industry and the market at large is going. And I'll spoiler alert, I do not have a crystal ball, but you can see these macro trends in healthcare. And so investors who oftentimes do not have a background in healthcare, need somebody to come alongside them and say, yeah, this company is really good on paper and they're doing the right thing, or they're going down a broken path, one or the other. So it's been really fun so far. And my only complaint is that I've got too many options coming at me, and it's a good problem to have. But as I've mentioned, I'm sure you've already figured out, I like to do a lot of different things. And so all of these different opportunities coming are thrilling, but a little overwhelming sometimes.
Well, I have to bring up the point because, I have a innovation consulting company, and everything that you are talking about is so critical, this continuous innovation cycle, whether you're in healthcare or whether you're a traditional company or whether you're, a service organization trying to find the next big thing. But you're just bringing up so many different points about how COVID did lead everyone to having to think differently. The economy and where we are today, we're going to have to continue that path. So incredibly important lessons. And I love the fact that you love doing a lot of different things, because I think that's what drives and motivates you and has gotten you where you are. So I can greatly appreciate that.
I
Well,
think a lot of
go ahead.
I think a lot of entrepreneurs and innovators, this is my doctor diagnosis, have a little smidge of ADHD, and that's probably okay as long as you can channel it into energy.
Yes.
That's good, because we're not ones, those of us in the entrepreneurial innovation world are not ones to just sit back and say, oh yeah, the opportunities will come to me. We all have a little bit of ADHD when it comes to pursuing opportunities.
And I think the point that you're bringing up is you have that early focus on the niche. I always look at actors and actresses like Hugh Jackman, who can sing, he can dance, he can this. If his parents had told him pick one thing and stick with that one thing for the rest of your life, he wouldn't be this big megastar. So
that's right.
I think you find that niche, but it doesn't mean you have to give up all these other interests or passions. And you found a way to kind of bring all that together. You maybe plan, not plan.
Yeah, sometimes not.
Yeah.
Probably the one of the coolest things that I like to do, whether it's people or processes, is to try to cross-reference them in my head. And on paper, they might look very disparate. And sometimes, you can't force something a synergy that's not there. But oftentimes there are synergies between people or between different companies that you wouldn't expect. And so when you go through that mental exercise of trying to cross-reference those, sometimes things kind of pop up and you're like, oh, that's a pretty cool way of thinking about that. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But it's a mental exercise that I like going through.
I love it. Love it. Well, I know you had another appointment to get to, and I just want to say thank you. Any parting words you want to leave with those followers that are watching?
The thing that I tell people that I mentor, and the ones that even my employees sometimes, be authentic and be transparent. And first of all, I've had to take that mentality because my memory's bad and I can't remember what I told one person. And if I just tell the truth and tell it like it is every time, I don't have to remember all of that. And whereas, obviously there are certain settings that's not appropriate, but anytime that you can be frank and transparent, always being kind, people are going to trust that a lot more because they know what they're dealing with. And, we have such a bad tendency these days to hide behind screens and say things online that we would not say face to face. And so if you're your authentic self and say, look, here's where I'm coming from. You may disagree with me, and that's perfectly fine. And I respect you however you feel, even if it's differently than me. But I'm going to tell you where I'm coming from, and let's get to a better place of trust and respect. And so that's the mode that I've always operated under, and it's advice that I give to a lot of young people these days.
Oh, I love it. And I was getting a little tickle in my throat as you're talking, so I'm trying to manage that.
You're good.
But wonderful advice and closing thoughts. And I really appreciate you being with us today. And we will make sure people know how to get a hold of you.
Thanks, Teresa. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you. Let me